go over this. Okay, so let's talk about these results. So the first question, React context should always be used instead of Redux. Every single person said false, and that is correct. Way to go, right? React is something you really want to use when you're dealing with a smaller application, less frequent updates to your global state, and really when you just want to have a few specific global variables accessible to other parts of your app. Great examples of times to use React context when you're dealing with a theme or a language. Those are two very popular use cases, but also in a small application, it's okay. It says, I can have more than one context in my application at a time. Great. 100% of people said that is true. We can see an example of that from what we did yesterday. We had this counter hook where we used our context from counter context as well as from our to-dos context. We didn't actually do anything with this, but we did see that we could use both of those. Okay, and we also saw the old way of doing it, which is when we had to use our different consumers, which returned functions and then we had to nest that to use more than one consumer. Okay, so I'm gonna stop my screen share and let's keep looking at the results here. I can use context and Redux at the same time. Okay, 86% of people said true, and that is correct. You can use context and Redux at the same time. There's no reason for them to be used as mutually exclusive things. We haven't done that in our class, but it is something you could do. Okay, this one looks fun. Which of the following statements about context are true? Non-children of the provider can only access the default context value from time of creation. So only 5 people, or 24% of people, said that was a true statement. That is a true statement. So let's take a look at exactly what that question means, because it was worded a little bit difficult. So if we go to our provider sections and we look at our providers here, I did create my context here on line 3, and I call the provider on that context and pass in the values. However, where I create my context, I do have the option to pass in some kind of default value, right? I could pass in like, this is my default value. Now, maybe that doesn't make the most sense to put default value in our counter, but whatever. And this is going to be what the value is only for elements that are not children within our provider. So what do I mean by that? So if I go back to my app.js, and right now, counter is a child of counter provider, but to-do form is not. So if in my to-do form, I try to import the context of the counter context, it would be the default value that is passed in. There's not much of a point to usually do this except for maybe inside of some testing. Okay, let's look at the next result. Stop share. The next result, my context has a provider property. That is also true, right? That's in our code we saw. That is happening in our provider where we said like to counter provider. This was our context and it has this provider property. And then it says, when working with provider, I should always pass. Is that what? I guess it cut off the rest. Are you guys able to see the rest?
No.
No.
Why did everybody why 76% of people say true? Interesting that it cut it off. I think it was supposed to say when working with the provider, I should always pass a value, something to the value. And that is true. We want to always pass value here if we're using provider. Otherwise, there's really no point to use provider, and we want to pass something into value. The next one, whenever a value is passed to the provider, it should always be an object. So 33% of you said that is correct. However, that is incorrect. Okay, this happens to be an object, but it doesn't have to be, right? This could just be the number 0 for all I care, or
Hey,
some
Corey, we
other
can't see the
thing.
poll anymore.
You can't see the poll anymore?
No.
Has it been like that every time I try to share the screen?
No. I don't know. It's for like the last 3 that you said it wasn't showing up.
Interesting.
It just stopped all of a sudden.
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of just disappeared.
Good to know. I'll see if I can get it back on in a second, okay? For now, I'm just going to keep walking us. Can you see it again now? It looked like it just changed on me.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Very weird. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
That might have been me. I was clicking on stuff, but I didn't click end it, so I don't know what happened. I just clicked the X. All right, I won't click the X anymore.
No, it's Jimmy. He's infiltrated and he's trying to ruin the class. I'm just kidding. But you can see we don't have to pass an object into value, but we just have that option. So we were doing that because we wanted to pass in this count and this dispatch. But if we just wanted to pass like a single string or a number, we totally can. It says one should always use reducer when working with context. Everybody said that is not a true statement, and everybody was correct, right? We were using it just fine before we introduced use reducer, where we were just passing use state, and we were passing state things and functions directly. Use reducer is just one way for us to keep our code cleaner. Okay, let's look at question 5. What are the ways I can use my context? Select all that apply. So this first one here with classes, we have this myContext.consumer, and it does this function. That is a way. If we recall back to our class counter example, it is grabbing the context and using its consumer property. The second one there says static context type, myContext, and then this context. That is also a true statement. We can do that also with classes. We saw that here on line 6 earlier. Now this only works if you're importing just one context. If you're trying to grab from 2 contexts, you're going to have to do it with the way we've done it here on lines 9 through 19. However, if you're only using one context, you can go ahead and do static context type context and refer to it as this dot context. Okay. Let's keep going. With hooks, use context and myContext. 95% of people got that one right. That's awesome, right? We've seen that here with our hooks where we've imported our context. We've imported use context. And we put them together to actually get the context that we desire. It says hooks with use selector. So 14% of you, I gotcha. That is a false statement, right? Use selector was a React Redux hook, and that connects us to our store. That is not part of React Context API. And then and then for 10% of you guessed with hooks, myContext. Gotcha again. myContext, we can't use it without actually doing something to it, either passing it into a use context or calling consumer on it, or grabbing it with our static context type. But this would only work in a class. I don't know why you would want to do it this way in a functional component. You would want to use context, okay? So let's go to number 6. Context allows children components to access a global state through the use of props. Okay, so 95% of you said that was true. Unfortunately, you're essentially all wrong. So it's not a prop,
Nani?
I knew it.
right? That was a little bit of a trick question. Context does allow children components to access a global state. It is not through the use of props. We pass into our providers a value property, but this isn't a prop to a specific child. If it was, we'd have to be getting props from here, where I would be destructuring like count. This is a prop. This, however, is not a prop. This is just allowing us to read something from our store. All right, so that's not a prop. 7, prop is short for. 10% of people said props. So props is not short for props. Props is something that it's short for. Let's keep going. 86% of people said properties. That is the correct answer. The one person who put propaganda, I love the guess. However, that is incorrect. All right, that sums up the poll. So I'm going to stop sharing those results. Just do a light walkthrough of what we did yesterday, take in any remaining questions, and then we're going to go ahead and hit our lab. So what we did yesterday, we started off by creating these provider components. These are going to be wrapper components. This is a clean way of writing it. We saw originally that we could do the similar thing just in our app file, but by taking that code away into its own little file and cleaning it up and splitting it out, it just made for a lot more clean and readable code. So we did that. So in order to create a new context, you have to import it from React. And we went ahead and on line 3 here, export const our create context, and we can put in our default value or something else. This is just a representation or nothing. I often will do it with nothing. And then we can go ahead and call provider on that. Pass in we have to have a value, and in value we pass in whatever we want to be available to the children components. And then inside of our context provider, we're just going to render our props.children. This way, this component is a high order component or a wrapper component, which works very much similar to like the way our route works or our browser router when we were dealing with React Router DOM. Inside of our app, we imported those in here, those little providers that we built. And like, here's our counter provider example where we have our counter and our counter updater, counter class. And the way we access things from our provider store was by going into our counter updater here, and we were able to take things out of our context. So in this example, we were using our reducer. So there was a little bit more to it because we initially had a little bit more simplified app, and then we built it out to be a little bit cleaner. But how did that work? Well, we built on our basic reducer where we had our initial state, we had our action, and we had our switch statement listening for different types of actions. This is very much reduxy, right? And we were like, okay, in the case of increment, we're going to increment our state, decrement our state. Otherwise, just go ahead and return state. We had our action types. These just are protecting us from failing silently by having variable names. This is for merely protecting us against misspellings, and so they don't fail silently. We created these counter actions, which are action creators that just are a function that returns an action. Actions are JavaScript objects with the type property and an optional payload, depending on what you're dealing with. And then in that provider, I guess we should revisit that. We did this use reducer hook where we took in our reducer and passed in an initial state. This gives us back our count or like our state. This actually gives us back our like slice of state as well as the dispatch function. So with that, we passed in count and dispatch, and we were able to use those here. We took out dispatch here. And on the button click, we would dispatch. This is our action creator that we've imported from our actions file to increment. And again, we did the same thing with our decrement using dispatch to fire our action creator decrement. And to see our count, that was in our counter, we pulled our count out of our use context counter context and just displayed it here. So before I let you go, let's get some questions. Oh, the Banana King. I've been eating so many bananas, Doug, by the way. Just looking at the chat. So what are some, do we have any questions or do we feel ready to just hit the lab?
I'll have a lot of questions after the live.
You have a lot of questions?
I'll
Okay.
try first.
Yeah, after the live, I'll have questions probably.
Okay. So are there anyone who has questions now? All right. Well, I'm not going to make you wait forever to ask. Okay. So